everyone, Madilynn Dale here, the chapter goddess. I am a mom, author, blogger, freelancer, podcaster, producer, and overall creative. With this show, I really want to focus on creatives and bring their authentic self to life. How are they motivated to pursue their passions? What have been the struggles along the way? Does self-care play an important role in who they are today and how they connect with the creative flow? Bringing one's authentic self to the forefront is important in this world that we live in currently. Sharing your self-care, your tips, and how you stay on track for things without losing it completely is also important. Self-care is not talked about enough, and authenticity and self-care are what I like to highlight with my creatives, as well as getting to know them. So get ready for a fun and entertaining show. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get ready to meet this episode's guest. Hey everyone, I am back again with another author guest for you guys to meet and check out their work. This author comes from the wonderful place of Ireland, similar to my buddy David Green, but we're going to pick his brain and dive into the worlds he's created. But without further ado, let me bring him in and let him introduce himself.
Hello. I'm Derek Power, author of the Filthy Henry series, coming from Dublin, Ireland. So I live in Skerries, which is a little town on the coast. And yeah, delighted to be here.
Yes, I'm glad you could be here too. I am curious, okay, what time is it there?
It's just gone 8:30 at night.
Nice. Wow. So I knew like you guys were later than us, but like time zones are so confusing with anybody. So
yeah, it's even worse when you have to work in time zones, because I work with American people and Australian people.
Oh,
so it's like 13 hours in one direction and 5 hours in another direction. So you're trying to like plan your meetings and like, what can you do?
Yeah, dude, that would be insane because I do stuff with somebody that's on Australia time a lot. And I'm like, okay, like you're the next day ahead of me. And I'm like the night before, it's like, okay, so my time is this. What is your time now? It's crazy.
Yeah.
Gotta love time zones. So let's talk about your series, Filthy Henry.
Cool. So it's a comedy fantasy series that I started writing back in 2014. So there's currently 5 books and a couple of short stories floating around in various places. So the whole kind of genesis of it was, in Ireland, we have lots of Celtic myths and legends that nobody seems to have really tapped into as like a source of inspiration for mainstream stuff.
Yeah.
So I would have grown up like reading a lot of those, and I loved them all. And I kind of thought, why not try and like take them and then put like a bit of a spin on them so that they were like modernized. So in Filthy Henry, all the myths and legends were actually real. And the reason they became stories is the fairy folk wrote those stories to try and convince the mortals that they actually were just made up and not something that actually happened. So fairies are real and they live alongside people, but they're hidden through a magical spell, so nobody can see them. And then you have Filthy Henry, who is a half human, half fairy, first of his kind. And he works as a private detective. And his whole thing is he enforces what's referred to as the rules, which is like this mystical energy that kind of ensures that there's always a balance in the world. So if the fairy folk try and do something to maybe infringe on human rights, or if the humans somehow get involved in the fairy world, Filthy Henry's the person that gets involved in the whole situation and has to kind of like mediate it and make sure that the balance is maintained at all times. And the problem about Filthy Henry is he's very sarcastic because he hates everybody and everybody hates him. So he's not exactly a standard hero.
Nice. That sounds like a fun personality.
Yeah.
How did you come up with the inspiration for his personality?
So do you know that whole write what you know kind of thing? I
Yeah.
would be quite sarcastic, so that got pulled into Filthy Henry. I would have also been a big fan growing up reading the likes of the Dresden Files and the Hellblazer comics, which is where John Constantine comes from. So kind of like that whole con man as a hero, and not necessarily relying on just his smarts, but like trying to get one up on the villain.
Mhm.
So I kind of said I wanted Filthy Henry to be the same type of thing. So it also kind of feeds nicely into his kind of backstory as a half breed, because the fairies do everything in their power to stop half breeds from existing. So Filthy Henry to exist is like a real thorn in their side.
Ooh,
And then he uses like the con artistry to solve the cases all the time and get one up on the fairy folk to kind of prove that he deserves to be in the world.
nice. So there's a lot of like sticky situations then about him being a half breed.
Not only is there sticky situations, there's actually a race of fairies who really, really hate Filthy Henry because their whole reason to exist is to stop half breeds from reaching their first birthday. So this actually comes from Celtic myths, and they're called changelings, which are in all sorts of mythology. But changelings' entire thing was they could look like a human baby and then die. And like the humans then would be very sad because they've lost their child and they buried the child. And when the changeling was buried, they'd come back to life. So in Filthy Henry's world, the changelings like sit in the pub and they drink like beer, but they look like small babies. And the deal is, if you get to your first birthday, nobody can take it out of the world. So Filthy Henry made it to his first birthday. So the changelings kind of see it as a mark of like shame. And Filthy Henry and changelings in particular have like a real hate relationship. Like he walks into a pub in the first book and he sees a table full of changelings and he orders them all bottles of milk, and it's like they're 400-year-old creatures, but like this is how he deals with that type of stuff.
That is hilarious, though. I like the humor. It's like,
Yeah.
up there they are. Let's just
Let's
poke there. Yes. So does that cause any like brawls or anything? Since he does have it happens in a bar, does he have a bar brawl because of that at any point in the story?
No, the bar that he typically goes into is ran by a fairy called Bunty Dooley, and it's kind of considered like a neutral ground. So there's no grievances allowed to happen, and if you do, you're under penalty of being barred from her bar. And since her bar is generally considered to be the best one in Dublin, people generally behave themselves. And she has like, she's a what they call a she, so it's like a really ancient fairy creature. And all of her spells are so powerful that like even if you conjured a fireball just to show off, that's it. You're teleported outside, and the building won't let you back in for like 2 weeks. So because of that threat, nobody fights in Bunties, and they all kind of play by the rules.
Oh man! So you mentioned it was in like modern day. Did you base his world off of your Dublin?
Yes, so his Dublin is based off my Dublin entirely, which is working out well so far because I've actually got some locations in it where they are derelict buildings around the city, but I've turned that the fact that they're derelict into it's a spell that the fairies have cast, and when you can see the magical world like Filthy Henry can, the derelict illusion disappears and you see like a lovely building in its place. So I've actually been told by some people over the years as they've read my stories, they go into Dublin City and they walk around and they've took pictures like outside like these derelict buildings, kind of going, this is Bunty's pub, or this is where Filthy Henry talks to that fairy who sells things. And so it's kind of cool that works out that way.
That is really cool. I've always wanted to do something like that myself. So that's awesome that you've got fans and readers doing that. How does that, like, when you first saw, I don't know how you, like, I guess maybe on social media or something, when you first saw that your fans were doing that, well, what was that sensation like?
So it was on it was a Goodreads article where I actually seen it, and I was like, no, I couldn't believe it. I was like, no way! Like somebody read something I wrote. That's great. Someone left a review. That's brilliant. Someone actually went to Dublin and then took a picture of themselves outside Bunty's bar, which is just like a rundown building. That's fantastic. Like that's amazing.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that is so cool.
Yeah.
I'm just maybe a smidgen jealous of that, but like I don't have any significant places that stand out in my writing like that. Gosh. You mentioned tying in the Celtic myths into the story, and being from Ireland, I kind of see how that like why that's big, but also I'm curious, did you have an ulterior motive for tying that into your story?
Not really. So coming up with kind of Filthy Henry as the character, that kind of he kind of wrote himself. Like he was always going to be a half breed. Tying in the myths, though, it kind of gives me a nice basis for the cases that he gets involved in. So, like in the first book, for example, he has to recover a leprechaun's crock of gold that got stolen. So that's like nice and simple. And then the tweak on the leprechaun legend is that there is a crock of gold at the end of the rainbow, but the rainbow is actually a magical alarm system, not a pointer to where you have to go to find your gold. And then in the second one, I introduced like the Celtic gods, and like in our mythology, we have good gods and bad gods, and the bad gods were um, imprisoned underground when the good gods arrived. So
Ooh.
the whole story is kind of around how the dark gods are trying to like bend the rules in such a way that they can come back into power. And so it's just there's like we've so much stuff, such a tapestry of stories that, like I said, nobody seems to have tapped into it from outside of Ireland. So I was like, I'm going to try and get them outside of Ireland.
Yeah, I'm always excited to find authors that have written in other types of mythology other than Greek and Roman. And I'm Irish, like I have Irish ancestors that are very like I have a lot of Irish blood still. It's more like Irish English. So anything that ties to Ireland, because that's on my bucket list, is to come and like travel through there to see like everything and just visit all the cool places. But it always fascinates me because I feel like that's kind of like a part of me, that Celtic mythology
Yeah.
over the Roman and Greek. And it's so like it's different. It's Roman and Greek mythology has been I don't know, it's almost overused, if that makes sense.
No, I get what you're saying. Like, and I would have been a huge fan of like the Roman and Greek mythology and like stories written in it, even PC games and stuff. Like, I would have played them growing up, but like, it always seems to be the same kind of basic template to their stories. Somebody
Yeah.
did something, someone got stabbed, done. Whereas like in the Celtic stuff, like a lot of it is trickery and guile, and talking to the fairy creatures, but not necessarily listening perfectly to what they're being said. So they say a word that you think means one thing and it means something else, and then they come up on top, that kind of stuff. So I kind of, and obviously being Irishman as well, I obviously lean towards Celtic mythology as the more interesting one.
Yeah, and it's like I have to ask too, the fae in your world, do you have like the actual fae and fairies that are common with it, like have issues with iron and everything?
So I actually haven't brought in the Fae or the fairies yet into it. There's an idea for a short story where the Fae would feature in it. But so far, the kind of standard creatures I have leprechauns, I have the She, I have changelings. I also have a race that I kind of, it's not an official race, but it's
Mhm.
based off one of the legends. So one of our legends is the Children of Lear.
Yeah.
And it's about children who got punished by a wicked stepmother and they end up turning into swans. I kind of thought that that would be a cool race in the stories. So there are leerlings, and
Ooh,
they're people that can transform into swans, and they kind of act like
yeah.
messengers in the fairy world, but they also act like spies because they work in the hospitals and the police stations. And if any kind of like magical crimes kind of come across their way, they go like, oh, we need to get Filthy Henry to cover this up because there's going to be exposure. Like the fairy world doesn't want to ever be exposed, so they use the Leerlings to kind of just keep tabs and make sure the mortals don't accidentally stumble across it.
Oh, they're like little gatekeepers. I like it. And they're very, it sounds like they're very similar to like shifters too, but they have more of a significant role.
Yeah, and they can only change into like the swan shape. And there's a funny scene in the first book where Filthy Henry is kind of he's working with a client, and the client is human, and one of the Leerlings lands in the street in front of him to deliver a message, but like the swan just like honks as far as the client is concerned, and Filthy Henry's like, "What are you talking about? That they just spoke to me like this," and she's like, "You were talking to a swan." So like you get to play on a lot of that kind of stuff, like what Filthy Henry sees and hears versus what normal people see and hear.
Oh, that's fun. When you had the inspiration for his character, did that kind of like him being able to only hear certain like their language versus like what the non or I guess the regular humans hear, was that kind of an idea that started or well was with him and then or was it one that developed as you created these characters?
So initially, there was only going to be Filthy Henry in the stories, but then I decided, I think I was maybe halfway through plotting the first book, and I decided to introduce a character early on who could be the audience in the book.
Ooh.
So the person who could ask Filthy Henry the questions, and then you get your exposition dumps of everything that's going on, rather than kind of just having Filthy Henry walk around and then think, oh, Leerlings are blah, 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 blah. So in the first book, he gets hired by a person called Shelley, and she's a normal human. There's nothing magical about her at all, except she's an artist. And in the story, I've kind of set it up that children have the ability to see fairies on and off, and adults kind of just dismiss it like imaginary friends because they can't see what's there. But if you're artistic, you can kind of keep that going into your adult life. So Shelley has, she thinks she's had some sort of involvement with fairy creatures. She knows Filthy Henry is a fairy detective. She goes to him for some help. He kind of begrudgingly takes on her case because she happened to see a leprechaun, and he's like, well, there might be something here. So through the first book, Shelley is the audience. She gets to ask Filthy Henry the questions, and we learn about the world kind of through Shelley. And then she worked so well in the first book, I kind of kept her around, and she becomes his partner. And like she's in every single book, and she has her own kind of character growth and character arc. But it kind of works really well then, because every time I'm introducing something new and magical to the world, Shelley is a human, so she's never seen it before. So she has to kind of go to Filthy, hey, what's this over here? Or what's that over there? Why is this going the way it's going?
I like that because it also gives the reader like the background of like who these creatures are.
Yeah.
Do you include a glossary or anything like that with your books? Having so many different creatures, I mean, that seems like it would kind of go with that.
Yes, and I really, really should. I actually, not only do I need to do that, I use poor grammatical Irish as Filthy Henry's kind of like magical language. So rather than kind of leaning into the Latin kind of stuff, like he says silly things like in Irish, he says fireball, football on fire, this type of stuff. And that's how he conjures his spells. But I forgot like that not everybody speaks Irish, so I need to put a glossary in as well. I haven't done that yet, and I need to go back and do it on all the books because, like you said, now I've got such an array of characters and creatures. Yeah. Probably be beneficial.
Or maybe you could just do like a go in and plug in a note like, hey, check out this piece like on my website or social media or something for a list of all the different creatures, and that would be fun too. That was just a random thought. Like the whole Celtic mythology stuff, it fascinates me. So, and I know there's a ton more creatures and stuff in that. What was your favorite scene to write with him?
I think my favorite book is the third one because it has my favorite scene in it. So the third book is based off it's kind of our epic, our biggest Celtic legend called the Táin. And it's about a warrior hero called Cuchulainn who defeats an entire army single-handedly of invaders from the south who are coming into the north to try and steal a magical bull that his king is in possession of. So the third book is his descendant has to kind of redo that whole thing. But Cuchulainn was like a mighty warrior, and his descendant doesn't believe in mythology, and he's also a bit of a drunk. And Filthy Henry has to like train him to be, ready for combat. And there's a scene in it where he's wielding Cuchulainn's magic hurley stick, and he doesn't know how to use it properly. So as he fires it, it shoots out a blast of magic that's so powerful, it's deafeningly bright and dazzlingly loud, and it's powerful enough to confuse your senses. And just kind of lighten that whole thing. And I have it kind of, it rewinds for 5 seconds as you go around the characters who all see this like beam of energy going across. Like in my head, I just have this vision of like a guy in a field, and he throws a stick and it shoots out this big beam, and people get so confused like by the magical, just pure raw magical energies coming from it. So I think that's always been my favorite scene from the entire series.
Ooh. Do you have a theme song maybe that goes with that? Because I could totally see like a song fitting with that.
I'm quite fortunate. I have a friend who during COVID wrote Filthy Henry a theme song, and he's played it and he's recorded it, and then he put it into a podcast. So there's podcast versions of the books and the first three books, and he has theme tunes and everything, and he does the whole shebang. Because he was looking for something to do during the lockdowns.
Oh, that is really cool. On top of writing the series with Filthy Henry, you got a lot of other stuff going on too. You work full time, right?
Yes.
How does that affect your writing schedule? How do you get things done?
So aside from having a job, I also have two fantastic little kids that take up a lot of time.
I know
So
this
yeah, right. So the way I've kind of gotten into my writing routine is when they're in bed and everything's been done and dusted, I sit down, and before I do like any Netflix or reading or anything like that, I have to do my writing. So I have to do at least 500 words a day. And the reason I set that is because through kind of like trial and error, I found out I can either on a bad day, I can just about manage to drag 500 words out, or on a good day, I can bang out like 1,500 words, and it's like, half an hour has gone by. So I do most of my writing in the evening times, with the exception of the weekends. I try and get it done during the afternoon, because the kids might have like a play date, or they might be just watching something on Netflix themselves. So I kind of sneak off and I'll do a little bit of writing then. But the golden rule is, and it's one of Terry Pratchett's rules. It's you have to write every single day. And there's no exceptions. You have to write on Christmas Day. You have to write on your birthday. You have to write every single day. So I do that ever since the first book. I write literally every single day. If it's not necessarily a book that I'm writing, it's an outline of something. Or I might be doing edits, or I might be just even writing a short story that I'm never going to do anything with. It's just constantly kind of getting the ideas out of my head.
Yeah, I like that, because that's a good, like, productive habit to keep. Your kids, do you talk with your kids about some of the stories you write, or like tell them some of the Celtic mythology stories, but like a kid-friendly version, obviously?
Yeah. So we have Celtic children stories that they have read at bedtime, and they love all that kind of stuff. My eldest, she's 7, and she actually has a character in the fourth book, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I told her about that character, and she's like, "Oh my god, that's amazing!" So I've kind of been reading the first Filthy Henry to them at nighttime, and they're kind of like they're enjoying it, which is kind of nice in many ways. But then my youngest, he goes, "Am I in your books?" So I was like, "Not yet, but you will be." So I've written him into the last book, so they're in the books now as well. And then like that, they know a lot about the Celtic mythology just from listening to us and from us telling them things. I remember I told Olivia, we were walking to school one day, and she happened to see a dog's paw print in the cement, because when it was being laid, a dog walked across it or something.
Yeah.
And she just goes, "Oh, look at that!" And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's a hellhound." And she's like, "Oh, what's a hellhound?" And like I came up with this like whole thing from the myths, where they're creatures and they can put their paws on stone and they leave a mark. So now anytime she sees them, she's like, "Look, hellhound! Oh, hellhound!" So she's kind of always had a little bit of magic going in her head, which is really cool.
That is awesome, because I actually have a series that's focused on hellhounds, shifters. Well, I guess it's kind of like shifters, but they're hellhounds. So that is really cool that you're getting to immerse her in all of that.
Yeah, you have to. At an early age, it's best to grab them quick.
Oh yeah, definitely. Let's talk about your planning routine, because you are a planner rather than a pantser. What does that look like?
I don't know how people do pantsing. I really don't. It terrifies me. So my planning routine is usually the ideas will kind of pop into my head if I just kind of walk into the shop or I walk with my dog or whatever, and I'll be like, "Oh, that's a good idea. I think I actually might have something there." So, when I have that kind of genesis of the idea, I'll sit down with I'm old school, so I'll sit down with an A4 pad, and I'll kind of just jot out a few little things that have cropped up, and then I'll pull out my Celtic books that I have, and I've loads of them on the shelves and whatnot. And I'll start kind of looking for creatures or maybe some of the myths that might suit it. Um, the myth has to suit the story. I don't try and force the myth into the story. So if there's nothing, I might scrap the idea
Mhm.
altogether. But so far, I've been able to kind of find stories that align with what I want to do. Um, Once I have that kind of done, I'll do maybe like an A4 page typed up of like a really rough outline of the story. And then when I'm kind of happy with that, I start to do out the chapters. And each paragraph will be a chapter that I want the book to have. And I kind of always ensure that the chapters always have like a clear and valid point that will drive the story forward. So I don't really like a meandering chapter that kind of just moves the characters from point A to point B. Like that's not really useful. Like so if you go from point A to point B, you have to get a clue at the end that tells Filthy Henry what the case is going to be or what direction he needs to go in for the investigation. Um, they usually come out to be about 10 pages when I'm finished.
Mhm.
And then that file is always open when I'm working on the actual chapter drafts themselves. I often refer though to the plot as more like a plant than set in stone.
Yeah.
So as I'm like working through the chapter, you know, a new idea might crop up in my head, or kind of like, oh, that's an interesting take. I can do that instead. So long as the new idea kind of enhances the plot rather than totally destroys it, I'll bring it in. So sometimes the finished first draft might not look 100% like the plot, but it'll look like 80%. And then the other 20% would be kind of just ideas that kind of got spawned out as I was working on it.
Ooh, I like that. Does it help you doing that to keep your characters organized? Like, do you say you create a new character that's going to last throughout the series? Do you have like a separate page where you write their information down?
I do actually. It's usually if it's a new character who's only been introduced in that book, it's usually the first page of the plot file. I'll
Okay.
put those characters in. The other thing I sometimes do is characters that have kind of gone through the entire series. So there's four characters that usually appear in each of the books all the time. And if there's any kind of like development of their character arc or something,
Hmm.
just at the top of the file, I'll stick in where they were in the last book and where I want them to go in the next book. And that's just more like a reminder for myself. You know, I need Shelley to go from being a badass to being a super badass. I need Bunty to be annoyed at Filthy Henry because of something he done in this book, and just remember to bring that information along with you in the next book.
Nice. What are some of the themes that you've found reoccur in your stories?
I suppose the big team that I see happening is between Filthy and Shelley.
Hmm.
So Filthy's always kind of been a bit of a loner before Shelley showed up. So each book, their kind of friendship, and it is a friendship. I don't go down like the romantic angle with them at all.
Hmm.
Their friendship kind of gets stronger, and Filthy Henry kind of realizes that maybe he's 100 years old, but he looks like he's in his 30s because of the fairy blood in him. So he's kind of realizing that maybe for the last 70 years, he could have actually had a friend if he'd just been willing to open himself up a little bit. So um, Bunty Dooley has commented before that Shelley is sometimes a bad influence on Filthy
Ooh.
because Filthy operated with the kind of same MO of he's gruff, people don't like him, and he just gets the job done because he doesn't care about anybody. And then when Shelley came on the scene, he started to kind of soften because he realized he could have friends.
Yeah.
So Bunty's kind of like said that he kind of has lost his edge a little bit until somebody maybe attacks or threatens Shelley, and
Mhm.
then he gets kind of very big brothery and starts to get very defensive about her. So his kind of growth is one of the big themes that goes through it. Shelley's also is a big growth theme throughout the whole thing. She starts off as a quite meek, almost reclusive
Mhm.
individual. And then by book five, like she's calling the shots. She's the one who's coming up with the plan. She's telling Filthy Henry, I don't have any magic. You need to do this, this, and this because I need to save the day. And this is how we're going to do it. So, and they're the kind of two big themes that recur throughout the whole series.
Ooh. Do they ever have like does Filthy Henry and Shelley ever develop a romantic relationship? I mean, you mentioned they become partners for like his detective business, but does anything romantic ever develop between them?
No, in the first book, I did kind of do a little bit of a um tablecloth pull where there
Mhm.
is a scene where they're about to kiss, or Shelley thinks they're about to kiss, but Filthy Henry's not going to kiss her.
Ah.
And then without kind of going into the plot itself, something happens, and something happens, and then Shelley and Filthy Henry don't kiss, and then in the next book, I kind of resolved that quite quickly by Shelley realizing that he's just a big brother. He's more of a friend. He doesn't
Aw.
see her like that at all. Filthy Henry and Bunty, there's also a romantic history there that I keep alluding to, but I've never fully told. And
Mhm.
Shelley kind of figures that out quite quickly that they were romantically involved. So she knows that Bunty and Filthy are the relationship and that she's the friend.
Oh.
So I kind of keep that path going that way. I use a lot of the Doctor Who storytelling style where there's like
Oh.
so much of Filthy Henry's history where I kind of just drop like a line and then leave it for like a whole book, and then I drop another line and leave it for the whole book. So you never find out fully what's happened between Bunty and Filthy just yet.
Ooh, little Easter eggs. I like it. Ooh. I want to go back into his backstory now because you mentioned he's a changeling that made it past a certain age. What was his? Who were his like? What was his childhood like, and what were his parents like with him?
So this is another one of those Doctor Who plot things. I've
Oh,
never actually discussed Filthy's parentage in the stories. So we know his mother was mortal,
okay.
and we know his father was a fairy. It seems to be widely known in like the upper fairy circles, like the high elites, who
Mhm.
his dad is.
Oh.
Um, and like people throw it out at him, like oh, your father would be so disappointed. But Filthy Henry never has confirmation who his father is. And even up to book 5, I still haven't officially. I know who his father is, but I still
Yeah.
haven't officially told the readers who his father is. I just keep on dropping a little clue every time a certain character shows up in the stories. So we haven't seen Filthy Henry growing up. When we meet him, he's 97,
Yeah.
and so he's been around for nearly 100 years anyway. And by book 5, he is 100 years old. He's never talked about his mother. There's a very specific reason he doesn't talk about his mother though. He doesn't want anyone to find out where his mother is buried because his mother would be long gone. Like if he's 100, his mother, even if
Yeah.
he lived to be 100, she'd be quite old. So he doesn't want anybody in the fairy world to find out where his mother is buried. And there's a throwaway line that I don't think anyone's ever picked up on in book 3, where Filthy Henry says to Shelley, Filthy Henry is not actually his name.
Hmm.
It's the name he picked because if he has that name, nobody knows what his actual name is. And if they don't know what his actual name is, they can't figure out who his mother is. And then that way his mother's grave is protected. Um,
Ooh.
so he chose the filthy part is because the fairy creatures see him as dirty. So he took filthy. And then
Yeah.
he just picked Henry as a random name that he just decided to throw together.
So why is it important that they don't know where the grave is? I feel like I have an idea, but I'm not 100% sure.
Because Filthy Henry has 100% annoyed very powerful fairy creatures by stopping their plans over the years.
Oh.
So the last thing he wants to have happen is somebody dig up his mother or reanimate his mother, or like in Celtic mythology, if you get a piece of a person, you can capture their soul, all these types of things. So he's kind of using this alias uh,
Mhm.
to protect his mother. And in book 5, he actually visits his mother's grave, and I kind of describe the graveyard, but it's
Yeah.
like a real old, run down, not in use graveyard anymore, except for one gravestone that's kept immaculate, and that's because he's the only person that still remembers there's a graveyard here to visit. Um,
Wow.
so there's yeah, I'm slowly revealing all those little bits. But as to who his dad is, I know who it is, and there are clues in all 5 books, but I haven't officially said this is his dad.
So if he's got an alias name, how do they determine he is that person's son? Like, is it just like resemblance and power similar to him?
It's his power set, yeah. So like one of the limitations I put on him is because he's a half human,
Mhm.
he doesn't have the full range of spells at his disposal. So even like casting a fireball, which is his kind of go-to move,
Yeah.
it's quite draining on him to do that, and he has to eat a lot of food to kind of replenish his energies. Um, in one of the stories, though, when something goes drastically wrong, he taps into this like almost primordial rage magic.
Mhm.
And even though his own internal magic account or tank is empty, he suddenly is like super powered. And like the fairies that he's dealing with are like, "Well, this is no, this is bad because where did he get this energy from?" And then the king of the leprechauns kind of says to him, "It's like, geez, you're very close to your dad with your temper there." So that's kind of like the power set link. The fairy that is his father would be also as rage inducing when he wants to be.
Ooh, I would hate to get on his bad side. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Ooh. Um, a question I like to ask all creatives that I chat with on this is, what do you do for self-care to keep the world from like basically crushing your creative soul?
Um, Oddly enough, it's be creative.
Yeah.
Is what I do. So I like I said earlier on, like I write at least 500 words a day. That's gotten to the point there where there's a bit of an itch if I don't. So like I can feel it in the back of my brain, like you need to do it, you need to do it. So I just make sure that I get that done all the time. That's one. The other one is particularly if I've had like a hectic work week. And my wife is great with this because she'd also be kind of like a creative mindset person, so she would have to do this herself too. I just kind of like I go like I need half an hour with a cup of coffee and a book, and I'll just go somewhere, and I might just be sitting in the sitting room with the kids beside me, but like I disconnect from social media, from my phone, all that stuff, and it's coffee, book, read it for half an hour. If the kids are beside me or not, it doesn't matter. Generally, when I'm sitting on the sofa, the kids will also kind of sit on the sofa because they like to cuddle up. So those kind of little routines help me keep the mental headspace in a good place. And like I said, like work will get in the way, but I just make sure to kind of like at the weekends do a bit of reading and every day do a bit of writing.
Ooh. And I noticed too on the blog portion that you mentioned you draw as well.
Yes.
So has that influenced the characters in your stories?
Um, Oddly enough, I've never drawn Filthy Henry, and
Mhm.
I really should at some stage to see what he looks like. Now I've described him like loads of times, but I've never actually drawn him. Um, I don't think I've done any art on the characters or anything other than the covers. I've drawn all the covers myself,
Ooh.
so they're all my own little creations. But yeah, no, I've never had the art inspire anything that goes on in the stories. But there is an idea that I have for a druid character who is an artist
Mhm.
someday, because they done those beautiful Celtic designed books and all that Celtic art and stuff. So that's an idea that's kind of been circling around my brain the last couple of months.
Ooh. I like that. I like that you can tie that into your work because it also is kind of a financial benefit too, if you think about it, because you're not paying somebody to create your cover art.
Yes.
Ooh.
And this was back before you have what's the thing? The
Is it the AI
mid
stuff
journey,
or
yeah,
the
the AI stuff,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh man. That is such a like hot topic right now with everything. Ah.
Yeah, seriously.
Our final question is, what does success look for getting tongue tied again. What does success look like for you?
Success looks like people I don't know in my family
Mhm.
reading my books and leaving me reviews. And like I the whole indie side of publishing, the bit that I really enjoy is that I can control the price points. Like I have a bit of a gripe when you buy a digital book from a big publisher and it's the same price as the physical book. I don't get why that's a thing.
Gosh, yes.
So I price all of my physical books. Like you can buy all my books in print if you want, but like it's bare minimum costing. It's like literally the cost of printing, whatever the service costs. That's what I
Mhm.
charge. It's the digital books are the ones where I make my money, and I've priced them way down because you're not getting a physical thing. So that's the way I like to do that. So not making tons of money off it, but having people read it that I don't know, that I've never met, and then leaving reviews. Reviews are great, and particularly on Goodreads. I live on Goodreads,
Yeah.
and I'm always like refreshing, and it's like, oh, a new review, and I go in and see it. And sometimes they're not great. Like there was a review 2 months ago, I think, where the person just found Filthy Henry to be too sarcastic, and she hated him. I was like, that's okay. You know, if you don't like him, then you don't like him. There's a 5-star review that said they found his sarcasm brilliant and they loved him. So it's like, you're never going to write something that pleases everybody.
Yeah.
But that's kind of success for me. And then we have a Dublin Comic Con, happens every year in the summers. I've gone to that a couple of years as a trader, so I've had my books on sale. And there's been a few times where people have walked past my stand, and then they've doubled back and they go, oh, I saw that online. And I was like, oh my God, you saw me online and now you're coming back. And they're like, yeah, I'll have to buy one or two, and they'll buy a book or two. And it's like, that's kind of cool. So that's success for me, kind of having your stories read by people beyond just your circle of family and friends.
I like that. And a note on the bad review you got, you could totally use that as a marketing thing. There is an author, actually, I've seen a couple authors now since she did it, that utilized her 1-star review as a marketing technique, because it was something about like the author, they wish they had known before they picked up the book that the characters were gay. And she turned that around to use as a marketing tip, and it's helped her increase her sales like crazy. But like taking that about him being sarcastic, because I mean, I can't think of anybody that doesn't enjoy an actual sarcastic character. I mean, come on now, that adds flair. So
I have a one review that begs to differ.
yeah, that's true. But like, just kind of food for thought. You could a thing you could try. Because I've been waiting for somebody to give me a really bad review to try it. I haven't. I mean, I've got some that don't have words, and I'm like, but if you didn't like it, like why? Like,
yeah, why go to the effort of leaving a 1-star if you're not going to leave a bit of a
yes, for real. Like, tell me why you didn't like it. At least I can like. I mean, not that I'm gonna like change it for them, but like improvement. So
I remember my first 1-star. I think I've only got 2 or 3. Brag, ego. But my first one ever. Again, it was a 1-star, nothing else. And I turned to my wife and I was like, oh, "Someone's giving me a 1-star review. That's it. I'm going to stop." And she goes, "Give me it." And she clicked on the person's profile and she said she gave 5 stars to Twilight. Don't pay any attention to that.
There you go. Research what they read, and that's
exactly.
Man. Yes, the people you can discover that are just straight up haters out there when you do that, you're like, they haven't left good reviews for anybody except for like this raunchy looking or crappy looking thing. Like, so
Yeah, exactly.
that's good advice. Well, Derek, thank you so much for being on the show today. Go ahead and tell our listeners and viewers where they can find you in your books.
So you can find me on, I have a blog, Power Writes. So that's power and WRITES.com. All the books are listed there in various formats, various places. The podcast is also listed on there. So if you want to listen to that, it'll have the links to Spotify and Apple and all those good stuff. Predominantly social media wise, I'm on Twitter as DCPower_author. And I think that's it then. I have stuff up on Amazon and things like that, but the website's probably the best place to find the generic links for whatever suits everybody's needs.
Ooh, awesome. Well, guys, thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you hadn't. And Derek, once again, thank you for being on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a blast.
I hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to get future notifications when shows come out. Also, be sure to check out my website. I have a blog featuring this creative with some other fun and interesting questions. You can also subscribe to my newsletter there to stay up to date with all things the chapter goddess and Madilynn Dale. Once again, thanks for watching and have a great rest of the day.